When you signed up for the EMBA, you said you're here because you say you want to learn and change. But there are a bunch of people who would look at, let's just say, experienced people like you, and who would say, but can people like you really learn? Can you really learn? Yeah. And you'll be saying, yeah, I've got things to learn all week. I've been learning things all year. That's great, and I learn things all the time. I'm here to say to you, not so fast. You have built-in mechanisms which stop you from learning. This is the fundamental dilemma. How do you maintain in an executive role the capacity to be certain and convicted, authority, what you wrote about in your very first essay, and at the same time being open to curiosity, open to newness? What we can say to you, you might sit there and think, don't worry, Ben, I'm open to it. Look, you're no different from anybody else. As you get more senior and more experienced, this capacity to learn will be switched off. Yeah? So all we're doing here is helping you become aware of that, and then you make a choice. We're not telling you learning is good. In fact, if you learn all the time as a CEO, probably nothing will get done. So let's have a look at these in more close detail. What is it that stops you when you get into an executive role, actually stops you from learning? So that's our hypothesis of working. We put you into more and more senior role. Our hypothesis today is the forces of gravity will stop you from learning. So let's identify what those disabilities are in the same way that children have disabilities. They're dyslexic, dyspraxic, so on. What are the things that if we put you in a role, this is what will happen? So there are what we call cognitive limits and biases. You might have come across some of these. We'll deal with these in a second. What we call excessive conviction and dependency that will tend to start to emerge. I'm going to go through each of these one at a time. Third one is the idea that if you accumulate success, yes, it will stop you from learning. Absolutely. And last but not least, there's a fear of vulnerability that starts to happen when you get to the top of an organisation. So I'm going to explore each of these one at a time. Let's just start off with cognitive limits and biases. Once you get into organisational routines and processes, we do start to lose our curiosity because it simplifies our world for us. Our brain then copes. Yeah? And we find other things to stimulate our brain, things like uncertainty, ambiguity, confusion, conflict, and personal life changes going on for everybody in this room. How on earth can you do an executive MBA and hold a job at the same time and have a personal life? Good luck. Yeah, good luck to you. So guess what? Your brain gets smart. Your brain gets smart, and what it does is it says, okay, I'm going to fixate on a few things. Yeah? I'm going to fixate. In other words, I'm just going to focus on one or two things, and I'm going to miss all that peripheral vision. And then you become unable to control impulses or moods. Yeah? What that is when you get frustrated as a boss because we've given you too many assignments for a program that you chose to do, you'll send that anger to someone. You might send it to us, you might send it to your direct reports, but you'll send it somewhere. We know this. You'll even do this on Wednesday. You will do it in some way on Wednesday, because this is what organisations will do to you. And here's the interesting thing is, there's one learning in this for you about what do you do with your anger, but guess what? There's a whole lot of stuff about what do you do when other people want to send it your way. That's interesting stuff. But the thing we will discover about emotions, particularly things like frustration, anger, irritation, and so on, is we have to get rid of it. I'd like you to imagine that you're going back to that after this class, you're going to get an email from one of your peers who's basically pointing out to your boss that you've been incompetent and lazy. Yeah? What are you going to be doing this afternoon? Yeah? You might be in class, but you'll be sitting there. And then tonight, you'll be sitting in front of your keyboard going, and you'll probably be hitting the keyboard because that's the anger trying to get out. And you'll hit it really hard. Yeah? And then, of course, you won't send it tonight because you know not to do that. You'll put it in the saved box. But then first thing tomorrow morning, you'll read it. Yeah, that looks good. And you'll hit send. How do you feel when you hit send? Doesn't that feel good? Isn't that great? And then an hour passes and you haven't heard anything back, and then you start to realise, there's going to be something coming back. Of course there is, because they then have to do the same back to you. And eventually, bing, you've got mail, and on we go. Yeah? So this is what the cycle can be. Your brain will deal with this for you. It keeps sending it out, getting rid of the complexity in the most impulsive kinds of ways. You'll lose your creativity. You'll freeze in some way. And so what we know is one of the best ways of dealing with this is just work alone. Just work alone. It's much easier. You'll notice that I do this. Should I involve someone? Oh, gee, that's going to be some unpleasant feelings. You know what? I just won't tell them about it. And then maybe that will come back to hit me in some way. We become more impulsive because impulsiveness is the brain's way of coping with unpleasant emotions. Just load it up on someone else and you'll feel better. Of course, there will be a reaction, but in that moment, it feels better. And last but not least, rely on your routines and patterns. Yeah. Rely on your routines. So this is what we would call a kind of a mindlessness, if you like. Yeah. In other words, we load complexity on you. The human response is don't lead. Just be mindless. Just let things take their course. And that's the challenge, is how do you pull things back and say, woof, what's actually going on here? The second thing is that as you get into a more senior role, you will start to develop more conviction. If you could have seen me in 2007 in my first Executive MBA class, I was 46 years old. I'd had a bit of experience. But how I am standing here today, I feel completely different on the inside. Yeah. And it's not just, you might sit there and say, oh, well, maybe you feel more confident. No. It's not just confidence in 10 years. I'm right. You're wrong. That's terrifying. Yeah. And I've noticed that in my voice. I've noticed over 10 years, I get asked fewer and fewer questions. I say, what's wrong with this class? They don't ask any questions. That's not an invitation to ask questions, by the way. I say, no, it's not them, it's me. I'm just sounding so full of myself. So when Manfred Kestevere studied these 300 CEOs, this is the list of behaviours he saw. They have a sense of superiority, a sense of uniqueness. They exaggerate their talents. They're boastful. They're pretentious. They have grandiose fantasies. They're self-centred. They're self-referential. They need attention. They need admiration. And they're generally arrogant. Yeah. So many people, when they see this list, they'll go, yep, that's my CEO. And I'll hold up a mirror and say, that's you too. You are on the way to being a very senior person. You are already very senior, but on the way to being senior. You will already start, like me, start exhibiting these tendencies. Yeah? And you might say, I don't want to be like that. There's something about the role that says, no, you can't help it. This is where you end up. And the question is, what does this? Is this, people sort of say, look, these are not behaviours. I've seen HR competency lists for most of your companies. I've looked at the list of competencies for good leaders. I don't see any of those on there. Now, why do we see these behaviours? So a question for you, is it personality? We hire people like this for CEOs. We just find who they are and say, okay, you can be the CEOs, you don't have to watch the HR competencies. Or is this something that the role does it to you? Sorry? It is power. I mean, this is the argument, power corrupts. What we're saying is we have data to say, yeah, that's true. But it's not just corruption of the outside, and others will take advantage and abuse the authority. It's also corruption on the inside. You'll enter into self-delusion. And many people will say, well, it's a bit of both. You'd be right. It's not just the role that does it to you. It's a bit of both. In other words, we don't appoint people as CEOs who don't have a little bit of this. We don't appoint people as professors who don't have a little bit of this to start with. But then after 10 years, it just grows and grows and grows on the inside. Yeah? Watch it. It'll happen to you. Yeah? It already is. So the idea around excessive conviction is, what can you do about it? Yeah? And it's just the awareness of it that's going to help you move that forward. This is a huge disabler for most people in organisations. Yeah. The third one I'd like to share with you is the idea of accumulating success. Why does accumulating success stop you from learning? Why would it? And those are exactly the very people who get into senior executive roles, people who have accumulated success. Yeah? So the whole idea around accumulated success is that when you start accumulating success, the desire is to replicate. You'll find this. This is relying on routines and patterns. Yeah? Repeat past successes. Oh, we did it really well like this in China, let's do it like that in South Africa. But you try and copy-paste. This was the whole benchmarking approach, best practice approach. Take this from here and put it over there. Now, that works to a point. But where it doesn't work, most people will say, we assumed we could just make a perfect copy. Why did you want to make a perfect copy? Because it reduces variance for you. Makes the world simpler in a way. Yeah? The other thing we know is that people who get into the senior executive roles start being driven by this avoidance of failure. Yeah? Now, many of you in this room, I know this, not from knowing you personally, but your predecessors and having read many, many SABs. Yeah? You are driven, you're ambitious, you like to succeed. And one of the things you cannot stand is failure. Yeah? It hurts. Yeah? Now, there are all sorts of reasons as to why you might be made up like that. Yeah? When we put you into a senior executive role, that desire gets even stronger. Yeah? It's a little bit like playing a house of cards and putting the final card on top. Don't be the one who puts the card on the top that makes the whole thing fall down. That's what it feels like to be CEO of a large corporation. You have been entrusted with these assets of billions and billions of dollars. Don't put that last card on there. Now, we've tested this. Here's a very worrying study that was done, nothing to do with business. It was a study that was done in a casino. Some anthropologists watching just normal human beings behaving in a casino. And they observed them all night and took notes and wrote things down and so on and so forth. And then they looked at them and they were interested basically in who was taking risks. And one of the things they did at one point is they were looking for an independent variable. And one of them said, well, let's divide them up into people who had been winning all night, yeah, people who'd been up and down all night, and people who had been losing all night. Just put them into those three categories. Who do you think took the bigger risks? The one winning all night or the one losing all night? Yeah. I mean, instinctively people think it's the winners. But you'd be right. It's the losers who take the... This is terribly worrying news if you have a successful career. Terribly worrying news for you. Yeah? To think about, what risks am I taking? The more successful I get, the less likely it is that I'll make a bet. Yeah. And here I'm not talking about a business risk, I'm just talking about risks with your own career. And of course organisations have figured this out, large corporations have figured it out by tying you in with pension plans and all sorts of things to make it even harder for you to take big risks. So there's a force from the organisation, but there's a force from the inside because you've got families to feed, you've got mortgages to pay, all this stuff starts going, can't take that risk. I wish I could tell my boss what I really think, but there are too many other factors in the environment that stops me from exercising my leadership. On the other hand, do we want CEOs that are like amoebas? Right? It's Tuesday and I woke up this morning with a great new idea. We're going to be going west instead of south. I'm adaptive. Think about it. Do you want a CEO like that? No. So all of this is like, you might pride yourself on being adaptive and changing the rules and things like that. Yeah, but be careful. That does not necessarily inspire other people. There's something about the role that we actually do want you to be predictable. And then all sorts of, so you see, this is what seniority starts to do to us. And then we start losing our capacity to learn and change. All right. Last but not least is the fear of vulnerability, the fear of exposure. The problem when you become more and more senior, you are more available to other people. People see you more. They see you a lot more than how they usually see you. So there's this sense of, wow, that feels vulnerable. So CEOs often quite like having one-on-one conversations because when they have town hall meetings or large group meetings and things like that, they feel more vulnerable. What is vulnerability? Everyone has very different sort of interpretations of what vulnerability is. How are you doing, Antonio? How are you doing? How are you doing? Yeah. Did you see that it took him at least 2 seconds to shake my hand? You all noticed that, didn't you? Yeah? I didn't prompt him, but that's what he did. Because he saw me coming with my hand, but he held back. Why? That's his fear of vulnerability as well, because he thinks I'm going to use him in some way and manipulate you, because that's what I do for a job. Yeah, that's my job. But what's crucial are those 2 seconds. Because I'm sitting here going and say, come on, Antonio, come on. Reciprocate in some way. Yeah. But that's what it's like. That's what vulnerability is. I'm exposed in those few moments. Now, when you're in a CEO role, that feeling of exposure can last for days, weeks, months. You will never get the feedback coming back to you and saying, yeah. And that's what you have to live with. And it's painful. It's painful to sit here, come on. Because if you don't shake my hand, it feels awkward, uncomfortable in some way. So all of these things here, firing people, being fired, saying you're sorry, saying yes, saying no, revealing parts of yourself, being open to rejection, all of these are forms of vulnerability, which we don't really like to do. And yet what we will say to you is vulnerability is our most accurate measure of courage. Yeah? When we look at vulnerability, and we'll deal with this research here, Brené Brown, we'll have a look at her on Thursday morning. She's done some really good work around vulnerability to show this is a lost opportunity. Yeah? But vulnerability just doesn't mean just simply pouring your heart out. Now, that's one item on the list. Vulnerability is actually kind of just making yourself exposed. So what's underpinning? So those are the 4 mechanisms, yeah? The things that stop you from learning. Yeah? Cognitive biases, accumulating success, excessive conviction, and a fear of vulnerability. All of this is underpinned by what we call human defense mechanisms. Yeah? Human defense mechanisms are these wonderful, so now we're digging down into the iceberg and going to say, what's really going underneath all of this? Yeah. These defense mechanisms are there to protect you, and because they are unconscious, they protect you without asking your permission to protect you. They just do it.